Studios. Joining us now, Scott Graytack, Director of Advocacy, Transparency International U.S. Office. Scott, thanks for coming on Middays.
Great to chat with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So I read the press release about this legislation, the Enablers Act, right? Risk to security, enabling risk to security, the Enablers Act. The Enablers, of course, the acronym for it. So I'm going to ask you to explain exactly what this legislation is designed to do. It's supported by Senator Wicker and also Democrat Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from the state of Rhode Island. Exactly what is this legislation designed to do? And also, please explain for our audience what a kleptocrat is, because I know that that's one of the goals here, and I'm not really sure. It's not a term you hear a lot about. I'm not sure a lot of people really know what that is. So, please.
Yeah, happy to do so. So, my organization is the oldest and the largest anti-corruption organization in the world. And part of that work entails when corrupt politicians in other parts of the world are literally stealing money from their own people. Part of them being able to do that and get away with it is that they have to hide that money somewhere else, somewhere where their people, where their own prosecutors and police can't find them and get that money back. And unfortunately, a lot of that money is coming into the United States. And so, what the Enablers Act does is it would require the people in the US who are basically serving as middlemen for intermediaries for the enablers of these crimes to have simple procedures, simple safeguards that can help flag and prevent this dirty money from coming into the United States. The Mississippi Sheriff's Association wrote a letter of support for this bill, saying that it gives them the information that they need to go after drug cartels, terrorists, organized crime, and yes, kleptocrats, which is basically a fancy word for a corrupt politician who makes his living and stays in power by stealing money from his own people.
Right.
Think about the Russian oligarchs who are sort of Putin's cronies. They hide a lot of their money, of all places in the world, in the United States. And so if we're able to go after and get that money to stop it from coming into the United States, we can help make sure that their corrupt dictatorship over in Moscow isn't able to continue business as usual.
So what sort of people, say in the United States, which this act, of course, is targeting, what sort of people, from what industries and professions do they come to enable these kleptocrats to essentially transfer their money, transfer what they've stolen, as you said, from their own people, and hide it and store it, if you will, in this country?
So I basically think about it like this. Once upon a time, if, say, Pablo Escobar wanted to hide his dirty money that he made from selling drugs in the United States, and of course he'd want to, because we have a very safe, secure banking system, a very safe and profitable economy. These criminals want to get their money in the United States. He would
Yeah.
just walk into a bank. And once upon a time, banks didn't have to ask, hey, where'd you get all these millions of dollars from? They wouldn't have to do any sort of background check on who they're working with. Now, of course, banks have to do that. If you and I walk into a bank, open an account, they have to do due diligence, what they call it, on their customers. So these kleptocrats, these oligarchs, these other criminals, they know this. And so they're not going through banks anymore. Instead, they're going to folks like attorneys, they're going to some accountants, they're going to, say, the folks who set up trusts here in the United States. Who incorporate a company in the United States, who take your money and invest it in real estate. They buy properties, or who take your money and they put it in private equity and hedge funds. These people don't have to do any of those background checks. They're under no responsibility. No law requires them to make sure they're not taking money from a Putin crony or a narco trafficker or a human trafficker. The Enablers Act would require them to be able to do these background checks so that we know that they're not working as intermediaries for criminals.
All right, so what sorts of situations or what sorts of just actions or any other characteristics would have to exist that would require them, necessitate them, mandate them to conduct these background checks? Because obviously, Scott, they couldn't do this for every customer, every client that comes to us that wants to make investments or, I don't know, form companies and whatever other services they're providing. When would they be required to conduct these background checks?
So the Enablers Act basically says to the Treasury Department, the Treasury Department is the part of our government that's responsible for going after money laundering, right?
Okay.
And it says to them, y'all are the experts, y'all know how these different industries may work. So look at them and base them on risk. If there are folks who are setting up, say, trusts, and we know that this is a main way that dirty money is getting in the United States, Treasury can craft different rules for the people who set up trusts. They may say that you got to watch every transaction if it's over a certain amount of money or if it's coming from a certain part of the world. If somebody walks into an attorney's office and they say, we need you to form me a trust. I'm based out of Moscow, and my dad is the oil minister there, and
Mm-hmm.
somehow I got $20 million that I'm trying to park in the United States. Treasury can make rules that say in those instances you obviously got to do some simple background checks. But importantly is that the bill gives a lot of room for Treasury as the experts to figure out which types of these enablers, which types of these services are the most high risk, and so to require that they have more safeguards when they're working with clients.
Okay, so I suspect that means that we'd get this legislation passed, and then Treasury would promulgate rules as a result of that. That would probably really go into details and be very explicit in defining those situations that would necessitate whomever these parties are performing those checks. It sounds to me like they're sort of don't ask, don't tell sort of deal. They obviously want this business. These are customers. And they want the revenue they receive from that, the fees they receive from that. But if they knew they were engaged in some sort of fraudulent or illicit activity and that was connected to these activities, I guess maybe they would be complicit in the commission of those crimes.
So that's exactly right. And that's exactly the loophole that we're trying to close with this bill.
Okay,
If somebody walks into your office right now, it is a don't ask, don't tell kind of policy. Even
sure.
if there are signs that they may be a criminal, if you don't have to ask these basic questions, you don't get that information. And now, if this law was on the books and say an attorney did have to ask and did have to do some background research, and they found out that this person is actually laundering money or dirty money, drug money, etc., and then they still go forward with them and they work with them and they set up that trust, well, then they're on the hook. That's money laundering. And
Sure,
so this puts them
absolutely.
between a rock and a hard place. They can no longer use this, plausible deniability, willful ignorance in order to, frankly, make a buck at the
Yeah.
expense of a whole bunch of people around the world and here in the United States who are suffering when money is being able to made off crimes and then move through our own economy.
Well, it would seem to me that as long as that continues to exist and we still have this don't ask, don't tell sort of unwitting environment, well, then the crimes are going to continue to be committed because the oligarchs and the kleptocrats know they have a safe haven here in the United States with very qualified people to help them.
Some of the best in the world. I mean, these folks at
Right.
the end of the day are political elites. They have the
Yep.
money. They get the best
Yep.
attorneys. They get the best accountants. They get the best, folks who are buying them real estate, putting their money in hedge funds, etc. And so that's why law enforcement here are prosecutors. As I mentioned, the Mississippi Sheriff's Association has been supporting
Yeah.
this bill. The largest association of prosecutors is supporting this bill. The Republican Study Committee is supporting this bill. And basically, they all see this as we've got to get this additional information into the hands of law enforcement so that they can follow the money, they could follow this trail of transactions and be able to go after the source of this dirty money and be able to keep it out of our own communities here.
No doubt. So do you think, Scott, that this sort of activity has increased as a result of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. That's where, when you think about kleptocrats, that's where I think about it, because that is a nation with a lot of assets.
Yeah, my organization estimates that Putin's government steals $300 million from his own people every year. And we've seen too many instances of that money making its way into the United States. Just a couple months ago, we blocked assets in a trust of $1 billion connected to a Russian
Unbelievable.
in the United
Scott,
States, all places in the world.
Pleasure having you on the program today. Appreciate that great explanation, great insight, and we'll be watching for this legislation to get enacted. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Good to talk to you today. Appreciate it.
You bet. We're coming right back with more. I see Congressman Benny Thompson on the television in the Element Well studios. Not sure what he's talking about. We'll be